What is good, everybody? This is TAETRO and welcome back to the Lo-Fi Loft. I was on a rooftop making a chill lo-fi beat, thinking about why so many of you don't need to buy so many instrument plugins. So I made this beat entirely with samples, no instrument plugins required, and I wanted to talk about some of my techniques in doing that and why that might be useful for you. But first, enjoy the lo-fi beat. Alright, I hope you enjoyed that smooth beat. I had a lot of fun making it, and now I'm going to show you how I created that beat using 0 instrument plugins, literally just using samples. This beat was created entirely with the UNISON Beatmaker Blueprint pack, which is so massive that I haven't even unzipped all of the folders yet. And as we dig into this, I guess it's important to say that the quality of the samples and the flexibility that you get out of a sample pack is important, and that is actually the backbone of this track. If you all remember this first sound here, this is a chopped melody loop. And the melody loops in this pack are absolutely crazy. And not like in a subjective, like musically, like, oh my God, they're fire loops, but just because of what you actually get in this pack, which is, of course, the regular old melody loops. And you can tell that each one of these loops has a lot of layers to it. For me, a lot of the time, what I prefer are loops and samples that I can have more creative freedom with, that have less layers within them. And the reason I say the melody loops in this pack are awesome is because we not only get the straight up audio loops, but we also get the stems. Here's what the original loop sounds like. It's got bass, it's got the keys, and it's got the guitar. But I really love those chords. So I was stoked to find out that I could just jump in here and grab the chords, because now I can chop them up and I can even transpose some of the chords. So that's what I have here for that opening. And this last chord here isn't actually a chord that's in the sample. I transposed it up 3 semitones. Now, I really did actually love that guitar as well, so I added that in as a chop. And all of that is really in context of doing a performance, right? I want to be able to perform, I want to play these. So chopping them up and putting them into the drum rack works really well. Drums are pretty straightforward. Usually we're working with samples when we're making drums anyway. So I won't bore you too much with that. You've all heard a million drum samples before. But what about when you actually want to use the keys, when you want to play in your own musical ideas? You can do this with sampling too, as long as you have some good one-shot samples. So let me play you this sound here. It's kind of this nice, almost like, sounds like an auto harp melodic sample. So within this pack, we also have melodic shots, which are different than loops because they're just single notes. That's the one we used here. And I used this throughout the project, so I'm not going to spend so much time going through all the selection here, but you can see as I'm scrolling, wow. There's like an endless, seemingly, amount of these melodic one-shots, and not enough sample packs do this, because now I'm not just bound to the notes that are being played in the sample that I then chop up, even though that's how we started the track. Now I can layer on top of it and make my own instrument. And this is very, very simple to do in Ableton Live and a lot of other DAWs, as long as they have samplers. I've got a new MIDI track here, and all you got to do is find your sample device in whatever DAW you use. In Ableton Live, actually all the versions of Ableton Live, you can use Simpler, which is just a container for any sample that you want. Drop this one in, and now we can play the sample like an instrument. Couple tweaks to do though. Raise that release if you want the sample to continue playing after you release the key. And we absolutely do not want to skip this step because it will make your life harder. You want to tune the sample to C. And a lot of times, in this pack at least, the sample note is there in the title, which is very helpful because you will notice when I play C, it's going to show me a B on the tuner. We don't want that. We want it to line up with our keyboard. So I can just go to Controls, Transpose, +1. If we wanted to do any slight detuning, we could as well, but we won't mess with that here. We have this new instrument, and of course you could load up a Serum or another plugin or something and go through the presets, but if you don't have access to those plugins, melodic one-shot sampling is a great way to build your own instruments and shape them. And then you can even do things like reverse this if you wanted to. Let's do a little bit of attack there. That already sounds trippy. Let's just reverse it back, and you just have control. You can filter it if you want. You can change the amp envelope. Make it more plucky. So I just demonstrate those basic sound design options there because it's not like you're stuck with exactly how the sample sounds. It is almost like a plugin in the way that you have some sound design options. Now, you're not changing oscillators and doing anything crazy like you would in a synth engine, but you do have some ability to alter the sound. So I did that with several instruments in this track. That's that guitar instrument. Next up, I believe we have this piano-esque instrument. Let's hear how it sounds. And maybe one of the drawbacks to this I should point out is that you are taking a single sample, and through every pitch that you play, the farther away in either direction, low or high, that you get from the original sample sound, the more it has to work to stretch and shrink and manipulate that sample to play the different pitches, because we are warping the sample. And if I turn warp off, you'll see that plays through the sample at a pretty normal rate. But if I go super high, 2 octaves higher, you'll see it plays through it much faster. Ideally, what we would want is so that it plays through the sample evenly, no matter what pitch we play it at. So it's just a little bit of a disadvantage when you're working with a single one-shot sample. I mean, I feel lucky that I work in lo-fi and I can just say, oh yeah, it's just lo-fi. Warping there in the complex warp mode, by the way, because I feel like it does the best job when you're pushing and pulling to make the instrument sound natural. Let's not sleep on these bass samples though, because I find that bass samples perform really well with one-shot sampling, because bass is sometimes more of a limited range. So you're mostly playing in the lower range, not playing that far up and down the keyboard. I mean, to me, that sounds pretty great. And then that's a more electronic sounding bass. Towards the end, I switched to a more electric sounding bass. Let's go an octave up. And you're not going to get the same quality as if you sat there and played in the regular electric bass, or you had to plug in that multi-sample to bass guitar. However, it doesn't sound half bad when you're playing slow, longer notes, which is exactly what I'm doing in this track. In the context of the track, to me, in the context of the track, it's a pretty convincing picked electric bass. This is one of my favorite instruments in the track. It's just like so dreamy and floaty. And one other thing I want to show you is as you make these instruments, as you take samples and you create instruments out of them and you add effects, what you can do is take the simpler and group it with whatever effects that you have. Let's just click group. Now it's in this container and we can save this for later. So now I can go to my user library and just drop this in. Of course, you could be organized and not like me and make a folder, but I'm just going to drop it in here and call this Dreamy Boppers synth. And now say I'm working on a project later and I want to find this, it's in my user library, drop it in, and we have it right there. All right, so we chopped kind of existing musical ideas to form our track around. Then we used melodic one-shot sampling to create our own instruments. And the last thing I will just show is a couple of the loops that I used. So number one, of course, if you're into lo-fi, you already know this, but the vinyl crackle, you can find it under the Foley, I believe, with a bunch of other really interesting Foley, which I'm excited to toy around with, maybe build drum racks out of the Foley. But that being said, in addition to the vinyl crackle, I also used some typing sounds. And I layered them in occasionally with the vinyl crackle very lightly, which I think is cool because if you recognize it as a typing sound, I like the vibe of like it's a chill beat to work to or to do coding to. Or to me, in the context of the track, when I combined the typing and the vinyl sound, it sounded like a fireplace crackling. A little bit. I had it pulled back more in the mix, but maybe. You let me know. Does it sound more like typing, or would you have thought it was a fireplace if you didn't know? And those layers are important because if I take those away, we kind of just... it takes a little of the nostalgic element that I like so much about lo-fi away. If I add these back in, it more sets the tone. The last thing I will show is, of course, a drum loop, which I'm always using. Especially at the end of my tracks. You'll notice that this comes in at the end of the track. It's just a rhythmic loop, and there are tons of them in the pack. I also just took a little piece of a loop too. That cool fluttery, almost like a bug flying away. But that's actually part of a bigger loop. And this is just another thing I like about sampling is, sure, there are these existing musical ideas that you can use, but how far can you push them, or what bits and pieces of them can you take to make something new? It'd be like if you bought a bunch of puzzles, but they could all fit together no matter what, and you could combine the different pieces from the different puzzles to make a new, original, beautiful picture. I don't know if that analogy makes sense, but to me, that kind of sums up why I love sampling. So here at the end of the track, you hear it all come together. Chopped up keyboard melodic sample, chopped up melodic sample. Add the drums, and then some loops and melodic instruments. With literally no instrument plugins. That's the thing. It can be so easy to just get addicted to buying plugins or looking for the newest, greatest sound. Like maybe this plugin is meant for these acoustic sounds, and maybe this plugin is meant for these 80s synth sounds. And I'm sure they do a very good job at that. But when you get sucked into that world, you end up with a bunch of these different plugins. Whereas, like, could you just find one-shot samples of the 80s synths that you like? Or insert whatever type of synth or sound you're going for there. It is pretty freeing, especially for beginners, to know that you can just work with something that's built into your DAW, like whatever sampler your DAW has, or simpler like Ableton has, and just toss in any type of sample to be able to play it as an instrument. All right, folks, I hope that this was helpful. Now, if you are really, really interested in sampling and you want a great jump start on that, or you need inspiration, you need new sounds, the sounds that I'm showing here, all these sounds that I'm scrolling through at this moment from the Blueprint pack from UNISON, these are just a drop in the bucket for the amount of samples that actually come in the full pack, because it's so big that each category of samples had to be in its own zip folder, and I haven't even unzipped them all yet. But especially the melody loops you'll want to check out. I can't stress enough that the fact that there's stems for each one of these is huge. So check out the pack. Link is at the top of the description. Thank you, UNISON, for sponsoring this video. Hope you learned something new. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.